Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. There has been a significant shift in contemporary Russia-Turkey relations, especially since 2015. From the downing of a fighter jet, assassination of a Russian ambassador, failed coup attempt in Turkey and Syria, a lot has occurred. The sale of the S-400 to an important NATO ally has been symbolic of how strong this relationship has now become. Russia has demanded as well recently that Turkey honor a deal they had reached over Idlib in Syria to clear fighters it has influence over. Let's discuss all of those issues a bit further. We're joined now by Mr. Onur Erim, who is a political advisor, speaking to us from Istanbul. He's a political advisor and author. We're also joined now by Mr. Egemen Bagis, who is the former Minister of EU Affairs of Turkey. He is also joining us from Istanbul as well. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Onur, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What do you make of the evolution of Russian-Turkish relations if we were to go back to 2015 and before that?
It should be taught as a lesson in colleges on how to turn around, to do a 180 on an international relationship, the worst scheme that was possible to one of the best schemes possible. I'm sure Mr. Minister can also add more than a couple of things onto this, but this has been an absolute phenomenal success of the both Turkish and Russian diplomats, and of course at the very end, both for Putin and President Erdogan, the way where it was and what it turned out to be today.
So Egemen, what do you make of this relationship then, Egemen? I'm sure you've seen this evolve as well. Why do you think it has evolved in the fashion it has?
Well, both Turkey and Russia have a very deep historical relationship. History has taught both nations to respect each other and to create an empathy for each other. And recent developments, global developments, have created common opportunities and also challenges towards common threats. What's happening in Syria has quite important repercussions on both countries. The way Turkey has been attacked by some outside forces is very similar to the way Russia was challenged by the same outside forces. So those things have created an understanding. You had mentioned in the beginning some unfortunate incidents such as taking down of the Russian fighter or the assassination of the Russian ambassador. But both President Erdogan and President Putin have understood that none of these could have been done by anyone who has any patriotic feelings in Turkey. When something of that dimension occurs, you have to look, who does this benefit? Who does this help? What could be the real motive behind such an attack? And those things really show you or lead you to a better understanding and cooperation. So the development cooperation between Turkey and Russia can become multi-dimensional with joint initiatives in many areas. And personal diplomacy between the two leaders, the two foreign ministers, the two intelligence agencies, the two militaries have created an important opportunity for both nations.
Okay, so because Egemen brought it up there, Onur, I wanted to also get your thoughts on those, as Egemen put it, unfortunate incidents, which I referred to. And of course, as you know, in November 2015, Turkey shot down a Russian fighter jet close to the Turkey-Syria border. Russia at that time imposed then sanctions on Turkey, a number of different sorts of sanctions, of course. What do you make of that incident, as well as the December 2016 then assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey? Those were quite dark days, were they not, for the relations between these two countries?
Let's not forget, it was not only dark days for the Turco-Russian relationship, but it was also dark days for Turkey, as we had just been started severely being hit by the terrorist attacks of the Fethullah Gulen organization, otherwise known as Fetha Terror Organization. And we were just coming about how serious this was, how effective it was inside the government and all in Turkey. Thank God we were able to pretty much get rid of that terrorist organization, crack it down. Now all we are left with is hopefully bringing down its leader in U.S. and its affiliates around the world, and they're coming down one by one. I really want to add that we also have to take a look at this relationship in a way. Turkey and Russia are natural neighbors. And for as long as both nations live, this fact will not change. As Mr. Minister very correctly put, the relationship between Turkey and Russia has a very extensive history. It has its bad days, it has its good days. But at the end of the day, we are going to be here in these lands for as long as God lets us, and so will Russia. So we will have to find a way to better our relationship, to enhance our relationship, and find better ways that will be a win-win for both nations. And this goes through cooperation. This goes through joint programs where both nations have a lot to work with. Now, I do have to take my hat off to President Putin here, because he showed himself to be a true statesman, a true leader, where he did see, I believe, that these unfortunate incidents, were done by members within the country that were now we know to be absolute terrorists. So again, this is a very, very interesting case that should be taught in universities, to say the least, to show how two determined leaders can come out of a drastic, extremely bad situation like this to days of today, where a relationship is probably at its best position in the history of time.
Okay, so Egemen, then I wonder, in the midst of those dark days, right? So in November 2015, we had the Russian fighter jet go down. Then in July 2016, we had that failed coup attempt in Turkey. And it's important, of course, for everyone to remember, for our viewers to remember, that Russia was, in fact, one of the first countries that immediately condemned that coup attempt, even, I believe, before even NATO allies did. Why do you think, Egemen, that Russia made that decision at that point in time to come out as quickly as it could to condemn that situation?
Well, Russian intelligence had signaled the cooperation between Gulen terror organization and foreign intelligence services. So it was quite apparent to them that those who assassinated their ambassador and those who played a very essential role in taking down the plane were not receiving instructions from Ankara, but from other capitals around the globe. And the relationship between Turkey and Russia have multi-dimensional issues, such as energy, economy, trade, tourism, cooperation in international organizations. And they realized Turkey would not take such a hostile attitude towards them. I mean, when you look at the economic relations, we see that the volume of trade between the two nations have exceeded $38 billion. Russia is probably the number one country that sends tourists to Turkey. Nearly 4.5 million Russian tourists visit Turkey every single year. On energy, we have the Turk Stream, Akkuyu nuclear power plant projects that are ongoing, and Turkey is not only buying natural gas from Russia for domestic consumption, but Turkey is also preparing to supply Europe through existing pipelines, natural gas that will originate from Russia. We have consulates in St. Petersburg, in Kazan, in Novorossiysk, and honorary consulate in Ekaterinburg, and Russia has consul generals in Istanbul, Antalya, and Trabzon, and an honorary one in Izmir. So the relationship is quite deep-rooted, and both nations realize that there are those others who want to harm that relationship, and President Putin and President Erdogan, in a very wise manner, have agreed to discuss these challenges in a very sincere, heart-to-heart, face-to-face, tete-a-tete meetings, and they came up with a roadmap that is bringing the two nations even closer today. Recently, Russia announced that they are lifting sanctions on visa requirements for special passport holders. Last year, when I was invited to the University of St. Petersburg, although I had an official passport, I had to apply for a visa. But this May, when I'm going there again, because I'm a member of the Global Advisory Board of the St. Petersburg University of Humanities, I will not need to apply for a visa because now official and diplomatic passports do not require visas. And we're hoping that eventually, like we did in the past, both countries' citizens will be able to visit each other with only an identification card without even requiring a passport. So things are on the right path, and it's getting better.
Okay, let's just take our first break, and viewers, we are going to continue discussing this relationship, but different aspects of this relationship. Now, I want to move closer to, of course, the modern times, as Egemen there brought us forth to the latest events that are occurring, but also, of course, about Syria, about NATO, and about other such relations which Turkey also has, and the challenges that they may pose for the relationship with Russia as well. Stay with us for that discussion. Thank you for staying with us, viewers. We're still with our guests, Onur and Erim, when we are discussing the Russia-Turkey relations. At this time, of course, we've moved on now from 2015 and what may be called the dark days and the challenging days at that time between these two countries. Onur, I wanted to talk, if we can, about where do you think the entire relationship moved from that Russia jet being down to then these countries deciding, listen, we need to get a lot more involved in trying to bring in peace to Syria through the Astana peace process. That's quite a large jump again, but how important is the partnership here for peace in Syria?
Let me just contribute two very short pieces of information that I think will shed some light. Some unofficial, well, I shouldn't say unofficial, but some thinkers or professors that had visited Turkey right before the coup attempt on July 15th. Russians were the only ones that were publicly warning Turkey for such a threat. That's information number one. Number two, what a lot of people don't realize, as of today, there are more than 300,000 children under the age of 18 where one parent is Turkish, one parent is Russian. This is the figure right now. That's larger than about 10 or 11 European countries as of today. So the future of this relationship could get a lot tighter than what people expect it to be, and it would probably be even beyond where the relationship would only look for the beneficiary on either side. So there is a relationship that is going beyond benefits of both sides. There is a blood relationship that's being developed. Having said that, once you're in the region, the two major powers in the region, Russia and Turkey, once they have a working relationship that is coming up as we see these days, it should not, and it will not, actually it could not be just at one point. It has to be on a number of issues. Syria is apparently one of these. When U.S. took it upon herself to come, quote unquote, bring peace to Syria as well, Russia, being a major power in the region, has also jumped in and wanted to stop the imperialist view of the U.S. government trying to overtake Syria, which is a very strategic place in the Middle East. Now, Turkey having this relationship getting better day by day could not turn a blind eye to that. Normally, historically, we would always see Turkey only side with U.S. or with EU. Now we're seeing Turkey not being told what the strategy of Turkey should be. It is actually setting the strategy for herself, because Turkey, in the last 15 years only, started realizing that there is no one-way street, especially in the Middle East. You have to make sure that there is a peace that will stay here for years to come. There is stabilization that will stay here for years to come, and all of these are sustainable. We know from years of experience, this will not happen with only the U.S., with only the EU. It has to be something that is also involving Russia. It has to be something involving Iran, Iraq, Syria. So Turkey is going to work with whomever is sincere. This now seems to be also Russia in the region to bring peace, not just to Syria, but to the entire region.
Do you agree with that, Egemen? Do you think that these two countries, such as Russia and Turkey, working together, that they can actually ensure regional peace if they work together?
I sure do, and I want to quote President Erdogan when he said, like hot steel quenched in water, our bilateral relationship has hardened and strengthened with every failed provocation. And he mentioned, as Dr. Erim mentioned, that after the July 15 coup attempt, Russia put in a very sincere and close solidarity with the Turkish people, supported the Turkish democracy. And when it comes to Syria, yes, the two countries differ on views, but they also respect each other's sensitivities, and they try to understand where the other country is coming from. So we understand, although we're very much against President Assad staying in power in Damascus, but we understand President Putin's worries about the day after and establishing a long-term plan for Syria, not like what happened in Libya, because after Gaddafi, it was all chaos. And Russia understands that Turkey's number one priority is to defend her citizens from terrorist activities that are originating out of Syrian land. Therefore, Russia supports Turkey's agreement with President Trump to establish a security zone at her border. And they also help us reactivate the Adana agreement with the Syrian regime so that the countries in the region remember their responsibilities to protect each other against illegal networks, illegal terrorist organizations, be that PKK, YPG, FETÖ, DHKPC, whatsoever. So I think those developments have created a better understanding. And we are now looking at the issues from the same level, not like before. So Russia and Turkey has this equal, not superior or inferior relationship where they sit down heart to heart, and the two foreign ministers, the two intelligence agencies, the two militaries do cooperate under instructions from the two presidents.
Okay, so Onur, let me get NATO, if I may, because, you know, that's an important aspect to all of this, isn't it? Turkey, obviously, an important NATO member as well. We all know Russia's opinion on NATO. How much of a challenge do you think that is to that relationship? And what is Turkey's balancing act at this point? Is it able to balance both being a NATO member, an important one, mind you, and of course then getting, for example, the S-400 surface-to-air missile system from Russia and to become closer to Russia? Is that possible for a NATO member?
Well, I mean, I guess any comments that we're going to make about this subject, we should always keep it in the back of our mind that NATO's life itself is being questioned, and very, very rightly so, I think. So having said that, Of course, there's some stress factors that is going to be brought upon, especially Turkey, as one of the second largest member of the NATO power, being this close to Russia. Obviously, the biggest example of this is the purchase of S-400s. But Turkey is never one by herself, especially in the international arena, to be the country that will stress things out. Do not forget, Turkey has explicitly mentioned years after years that it needs this aerial protection, and it was the U.S. Congress and the president that has repeatedly denied to satisfy Turkish need of the Patriot missiles. Let's not forget, both S-400 and Patriots are defensive equipment. They are not offensive. So Turkey has literally asked for years to have this defense mechanism, which, just to mention it, Greece has, but it was denied. So at one point, the Turkey said, enough is enough. If you're not supplying this with us, we're going with S-400. The U.S. didn't think that Turkey would go through with this for a long time, so they kind of turned a blind eye. But once they saw that Turkey was serious about this, overnight, literally, they changed their decision of many years, not selling Patriots to Turkey. Now they want to sell it like, it's hot in their hands. So, there's going to be some stress factors of Turkey being this close to Russia with NATO. But then I say, let's start questioning, as a lot of people are, the survival of or the existence of NATO from this point on.
Egemen, what are your thoughts about Turkey and NATO, and then this relationship with Russia as well?
Well, NATO has not been there for Turkey in some of the global crises that Turkey was facing. When we needed protection, when we needed support, we sometimes did not feel that our NATO friends were doing what allies should be doing, especially on the night of July 15th. It took so long for so many of our NATO allies to even make statements to support Turkey's democracy and Turkey's elected government. They waited to see where the coup attempt was leading and who was going to win before taking any side. So that created a problematic view in the eyes of the Turkish public opinion. But coming to the S-400 missile defense system, that's something that Turkey needs. Turkey needs to protect herself because we are not Germany, we're not Switzerland, we're not Finland. We're surrounded with difficult countries such as Iraq, Syria, Iran, Georgia, Greece on the other side. And this geography needs you or forces you to be ready. We have been trying to find a defense, missile defense system. We wanted to purchase from the United States, but they wouldn't share the source code, and their prices were huge. The European defense systems were also very expensive. We could not negotiate with our Chinese friends on different issues. And President Putin was kind enough to supply Turkey with S-400s, as he did to other NATO member countries like Greece. Greece currently has S-300 missile defense systems from Russia. And Turkey is also now considering to buy both Patriot missile system from the United States and the S-400s from Russia. And their purposes would be totally different. The S-400s will protect Turkey from any attacks coming from the south, and the Patriots will also protect us from any attacks coming from the north or the west.
Right. Okay, so Onur, I wanted to, if you allow me, I wanted to go just now to present day deals that are on the table, specifically when it comes to Syria between Russia and Turkey. And one of those deals that's being spoken about just in these days specifically, Onur, is that deal of a demilitarized zone in northwest Idlib that was agreed upon, I believe it was last year. So, Russia is right now, as you know, asked Turkey to tackle fighters in Idlib to clear them out of that area and to, clear out all heavy weapons, etc. Does there seem to be a bit of tension there right now? Because it does seem that the terminology coming out right now is that of a bit of tensions on both sides on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, as Mr. Bagis stated before, Turkey, especially when it comes to the matters in Syria, has not always seen eye to eye with Russia. And this will probably continue to be this way simply for the fact that we have different opinions about President Assad. Having said that, I think we should say that it's not an easy path to go down to, but it seems to be a path that will some way find its way. Let's not forget, Russia seems to be the better of the two major powers in the region, besides Turkey, between Russia and the U.S., where Russia has respected the concerns of the Turkish government, the concerns of the Turkish people, hell of a lot more than the Americans did. So I believe there will be a path that will join us both, where neither of the countries may not be 100% satisfied, but there will be probably a solution via the Russians than the Americans when it comes to Syria.
Egemen, what do you make of that? Because as Onur, they're correct, of course, there would be that very logical disagreement between Turkey and Russia over President Bashar al-Assad. They both did differ from day one of that crisis in Syria over Assad and his status. Do you think, Egemen, that they can look beyond that? Because it does seem like, for example, in a place like Idlib, that would be something that would create significant challenges to work together.
Democracy-based solution, meaning if the people of Syria, through a democratic election, re-elect President Assad, then Turkey has signaled that Turkey would respect the decision of the Syrian people. And if Assad allows for democratic elections to take place, then that would be an acceptable way out for both Russia and Turkey. When it comes to Idlib or other parts of Syria, Turkey has made it very clear that Turkey is not after Syria. Turkey just wants to protect herself from terrorism. And if Russia can pressure Assad regime to take control over their own land, and unfortunately right now Assad controls only 20% of his own country. Remaining 80% is under other countries or terrorist organizations' control. But if Assad can reclaim control and enforce its own authority on those areas and ensure that Turkey will not be attacked by any of these terrorist organizations, then it could be a workable solution. But at the end of the day, I think people of Syria have to decide who should lead them, and their decision will be respected by both Turkey and Russia.
Do you think that, Onur, we're working to a point now in this Astana peace process, which Russia, Turkey, and of course Iran are part of? Do you think we're coming to a point in that process, possibly because of the partnership and the understanding between Russia and Turkey as well, that will possibly have some sort of important result for the Syrian people, or do you think it's simply just too early in the process for that?
Well, I mean, it could be or could not be. We have, as you know, since President Trump took office, since I think he said it 3 or 4 months after his inauguration, he'll put out Syria, which hasn't happened yet. at least maybe practically, but not technically. I think we may see that process move a lot smoother and a lot faster if we actually see the U.S. Presence out of Syria just leaving the region to the country, to the nations of the region, and leaving kind of Syria, by herself to, as Mr. Minister said, have them hold free elections and give them the right, the Syrian people, their basic right of self-determination. So whether or not that process will be effective, that it will come to a resolution soon, I think it has a lot to do with U.S. actually, not just on Twitter, not just on statements, actually pull out of the region. And I'm very skeptical that the U.S. will actually ever leave the region by all of its power.
Okay, so Onur, I'll give you the final word before we say goodbye to both of you. I wanted to get your thoughts, Onur, going forward about where you see this relationship between Russia and Turkey going, and as far as when you've spoken about regional peace, we also, of course, have this U.S. withdrawal from Syria hanging over all of us, and the uncertainties that may create, which Turkey has said would not be a problem for it to cover itself, of course, through a safe zone or otherwise. Do you think that all of that will be overcome?
You have to realize, when we talk about the problem in Syria, the fighting in Syria, the only nation that we're talking about that is directly affected, just because it actually has a natural borders, I think just over 400 kilometers, is Turkey. So Turkey will have to do everything that she can to make sure that there's sustainable peace in Syria. Turkey has never had, imperialistic thoughts or plans for any nation, let alone its neighbor Syria. So I think Turkey has been and is still and probably will be trusting more to Russia when it comes to Syria over U.S. or EU. Which we all know have different ideas about what needs to happen in Syria or what needs not to happen in Syria. So I think Turkey is the only truly sincere country, not only because the way Turks are, not only just because of the way President Erdogan is, but also the fact that we will be the only real target if there is no peace in Syria. We will suffer the most consequences of any trouble that will continue on Syria.
Very well, gentlemen. We'll leave there as our final word, but I appreciate both of our guests and the insight and analysis that they brought to today's discussion for this segment. That was Mr. Onur Erim. He's a political advisor and author. He was speaking to us from Istanbul. We were also joined by Mr. Egemen Bagis, who is a former Minister of EU Affairs of Turkey, and was also speaking to us from Istanbul. Viewers, of course, this relationship between Russia and Turkey is an important one, specifically, of course, in the Syria sphere. But of course, there are many other factors to that relationship, but it seems most influential, at least, vis-a-vis peace in Syria and, of course, the Astana peace process, what may happen vis-a-vis safe zones, what will happen after the U.S. withdrawal from that crisis-hit country. We'll keep a close eye, of course, on all those developments here in The Scope. Don't go anywhere, though. I'll be back after a short break with our next segment. Thank you for staying with us, viewers, here in The Scope. Now, just a day after a Thai princess accepted her nomination to be candidate of an opposition party, throwing a wrench into Thai politics, her brother, the king, condemned this. The opposition has now backed down, as the princess's chance of being allowed to run have become naught. What does this mean for democracy in Thailand? Will the military's control over politics continue unabated? To understand all of that a bit further, we're joined now by Mr. Andrew MacGregor-Marshall, who is a journalist, and he's joining us via Skype now from Edinburgh. Andrew, thanks for your time and for joining us here in The Scope. what have been your thoughts, Andrew, as we first saw, of course, this princess being presented, even nominated, really, as a candidate, and her accepting, and then now that her own brother saying that should not have occurred in the first place?
You're right, Waqar. It was an incredible day in Thailand yesterday, and frankly, it was a disastrous day for Thai democracy. In the morning, when the princess announced, or when it was announced that the princess was a candidate, it seemed that some deal had been struck with the palace and the political forces of an exiled political leader called Thaksin Shinawatra that could end the long political conflict in Thailand between the red shirts and the yellow shirts and different factions in Thailand. So it appeared there'd been some political bargain struck ahead of elections in March. But with the king's announcement in the evening that his sister was not allowed to run, it threw everything into confusion. The party that nominated the princess is now back down. So it's thrown the elections into chaos. It's left the country even more divided than ever. So there's no immediate prospect of Thailand's political conflict being resolved.
I imagine the princess, obviously, Andrew, knew what her brother's opinions were on this, and obviously, according to the Constitution, which is what he based his displeasure on, saying that, according to the Constitution, she cannot or should not be running, of course, in an election. Why would she still then go ahead and accept this? I know on Instagram she claimed that she was accepting this as a commoner, but I mean, certainly she understood that she was being seen as a royal even in that case.
Well, technically, she is a commoner because she had to renounce her royal titles in the 1970s in order to marry an American. But as you say, even though technically she's a commoner, she's still seen as a princess. She's still a senior member of the royal family. But from my sources, and I was the first person to break this story that this deal was in the works a few days ago. From my sources, it's really inconceivable that the prince was not consulted in advance, the king was not consulted in advance about this before the decision was announced. So it seems there must have been some change between the decision being announced that the princess was standing that changed the king's mind. One of the possible scenarios is that after the decision was announced in the morning, the Thai royalist elite, who are really opposed to Thaksin Shinawatra, the exiled leader, and who've been fighting him for more than 15 years, they may have tried to put pressure on the king and may have somehow forced a change of mind. That seems probably the most plausible scenario because everybody I've spoken to insists that it's really inconceivable the princess could have made a decision like this without consulting her brother and without believing that she had his blessing.
And so now we're seemingly, obviously, as you said, we're in a sort of a state of confusion right now. Who are the candidates right now? We know that the military leader is still very much, obviously, the current prime minister, is still very much, obviously, going to fight these elections. But is there a viable opposition?
Well, the main opposition parties are parties that are sponsored by Thaksin Shinawatra, the exiled leader. Yeah. So one of those parties, the Thai Raksa Chat party, is the one that nominated the princess yesterday. That's now been thrown into complete confusion, and it looks like Thai Raksa Chat is going to have big problems fighting these elections. Thaksin has another large party, the Pheu Thai party, which was expected to win the most seats. But there's a possibility that the military government may dissolve that party because they allege it's broken electoral laws. So, in fact, these elections were designed by the military in order to really ensure they won. The new constitution basically rigs the elections so that it's very hard for the democratic opposition to win enough seats and to elect a prime minister. After the events yesterday, the most likely scenario seems to be that the military leader, Prayut Chan-o-cha, will stay on as prime minister after the elections. So we'll have a situation where elections have been held, but it's not really democracy.
And then I wonder what that means going forward for all of the above then. I know that the royals are held in very high regard in Thailand. Does this affect their reputation at all of this?
It certainly does, Waqar. The royals have been, widely revered in the past, and the former king, King Bhumibol, was widely beloved in Thailand, and there was nationwide mourning when he died in 2016. But his son, the current king, is much less popular. Thais have, very mixed opinions of him, and many Thais strongly dislike him. But he's widely feared. He really reigns through fear. And in Thailand, there are very strict laws on saying anything critical about the monarchy. That's why I report on Thailand from the UK, because if I went to Thailand, I'd be jailed just for having tried to report on the monarchy. So people don't say it publicly. But the king was already not really revered by Thailand's population. He's a very controversial character. And yesterday's events really have just made the situation even worse. There's a lot of unexpressed anger. So going forward, you're going to see a lot of Thais very angry. Many Thais don't want military rule. Many Thais don't really support the monarchy, and they certainly don't support the current king. Now, at the moment, because there's military rule and because of the strict laws, they haven't started protesting openly. But sooner or later, if Thais don't have democracy, I think we may well see protests and we may well see some kind of uprising.
Right. So, I mean, I remember the days, obviously, Andrew, of Thaksin and Yingluck and the controversy that erupted there on the streets of Thailand at that point in time, and, the many protest movements that came about, the yellow shirts versus red shirts, as you had pointed out in your first answer. I wonder, why aren't there other figures that can rise, or why haven't other figures risen, let me put it this way, to provide a viable opposition challenge? Is it just sort of that these are the elite of the country and power just sort of moves amongst this very small clique?
Traditionally, you're quite right. Traditionally, that's been the way in Thailand. It's been a small clique of powerful insiders who run political parties. The military's long played a role in Thai politics also. But there is one young progressive party fighting these elections, the Future Forward Party, which was being founded by an automotive tycoon. He's a very young and charismatic man. His party have put a lot of young candidates forward, and they've taken a very principled stance. They've said their main aim is to remove the influence of the military in Thai politics. Now, they might gain from the chaotic events of yesterday. If the Thaksin-led opposition is really struggling now after what's happened, we may see the Future Forward Party gaining more seats. So it's very unlikely that they'll come anywhere close to being able to form a government. But they may well win enough seats in parliament to be a useful progressive force. It's likely Thailand is going to take several years to reach real democracy. And this party is one of those that might help it get there.
So then as final thought then, Andrew, I wonder, what do you make of now the military's relationship with governance really in Thailand? Can the military, once it's tasted this sort of power, can it really step back at any point in time in the future?
It seems unlikely. After a military government or a military installed government was installed in 1992, the military did step back from politics for more than a decade. But then there was a coup in 2006. And ever since then, we've seen the Thai military really at the heart of politics. And even after these elections in March, as I mentioned, it's very likely the military will remain in power, at least behind the scenes. But really, Thailand can't have true democracy until the military learns that it can't interfere constantly in Thai politics. The military's argument is that they have to intervene in order to maintain stability. What they don't understand is that Thailand can't really have stability unless all this anger against military rule is resolved through democracy. So it's going to be a long learning process, but sooner or later the military will have to step back.
Actually, let me just ask you one more question, if I may, because we do have just a few more minutes with you, Andrew. I wonder, what do you think that the princess herself is feeling right now? I imagine that she feels like she may have had egg thrown in her face.
Yeah, I'm sure she's feeling chastened, and she's really been publicly humiliated by being chastened by her brother in this way. There are even some fears for her safety after what's happened. Now, from my sources, I gather she may be abroad at the moment, but she's due back in Thailand over the weekend, and she may give some kind of statement early next week. But certainly, I mean, it was a dramatic turn of events. She's been left really in limbo. It seems clear she can't pursue her efforts to become prime minister. So, as I mentioned, it seemed a deal had been struck. It seemed there might be a way to resolve Thailand's political conflict, at least in the short term. But now we're not just back at square one, we're actually back below square one.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that, Andrew, but of course, appreciated putting that all into context for us, bringing to light, of course, all the details of what's happened there in Thailand. That was Andrew MacGregor Marshall, journalist who was speaking to us via Skype from Edinburgh. Now, viewers, of course, what happened in Thailand within one day was interesting, where a Thai princess, one who technically had renounced her own royal titles, as Andrew there said many years ago, to be able to marry an American, was nominated, accepted the nomination as candidate for an opposition party. That was denounced by her own brother, the king. That nomination was taken back. That candidacy is now cancelled. What does this all mean for Thai democracy? What does this mean for the royal family going forward? What does this mean for the continuing military rule in that country since those protests, which we all remember quite widely between the red shirts, yellow shirts, etc. in that country because of corruption of the Thaksin Shinawatra as well as Yingluck Shinawatra. We'll keep a very close eye on that situation there in Thailand here in The Scope. That's all been for this edition of Scope. I've been Waqar Rizvi.